Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Joffe. It is 11 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the 15th. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, and we're going to allow a couple of folks who are working on getting into the webinar to join us. Just so that you are aware, this will be recorded, and we will be sharing it via YouTube and a couple of other channels, so you will have access to the information after the conversation today. There will be a handful of next steps that I'll ask many of you to take, and so if you could take the couple of moments while we prepare to get started and gather a pen and paper and just be ready to take some notes and add some action items to your to-do list for the day today. I'll also invite you to ask any questions that you have via the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Throughout the conversation today, we'll be sure to answer those, and at the end of the conversation today, we'll be sure that if we have not answered your question and it still is outstanding, that we get in touch with you before the end of the day, if not in the next hour or so, to answer that for you. So bear with us for about 2 more minutes rather, as we prepare to get started. And for those of you that are just joining us, we are going to be getting started in about 60 seconds. In the meantime, please go ahead and gather any questions that you have, as well as a pen and paper. We'll talk through a couple of different action items that we'll ask each of you to take throughout the rest of the day today, some of which will be relatively complicated and definitely will take some note-taking. This presentation will be recorded, and so that will be accessible after the conversation that we have today, well into the next several days. But like I said, the more that you can take notes and jot down action items, the better. And again, we'll get started in just about a minute. All right, and thank you everybody for joining us. Again, it is Tuesday morning, it's 11 o'clock. We are all together today to talk a little bit about the events that started this morning. And before we get started, I want to just quickly both introduce myself and then also remind everybody of the facts as we know them. One of the things that's really challenging about emergency situations is that information is so fluid and so dynamic. And as things change, sometimes one person knows one piece of it and another person knows another. But without looking at that whole picture, it's challenging to really make a good decision about what next steps you should take. So I'll quickly review what happened starting from last night and sort of how we got to this conversation that we're having with you all today. That being said, my name is Chris Joffe. I'm the founder and CEO of Joffe Emergency Services. We are a national school safety company that primarily focuses on schools in Southern California, Northern California, and in the Northeast. And today, both, or rather 2 of the 3 regions that we primarily focus on have been impacted by threats that have been received, and specifically they've been schools that have received those threats. This started last night. At about 10 o'clock, a board member on the LAUSD board received an email threat that indicated that there would be active shooters as well as bombs on various campuses across the LAUSD. Within about an hour, the email had been analyzed and was perceived as a credible threat, and a couple of hours later, a command center was formed at the LAUSD, and decisions were well, at least in the beginning phases of being made. Overnight, and as we got into this morning, a decision was called and made to close LAUSD schools, which impacted about 750,000 folks. If you've been watching the press conferences that LAPD as well as LAUSD has offered this morning, they've made particular points to say that the huge number of people that are impacted by a decision like this. A little while later, there was a threat that was also received in New York. At this time, the threat in New York is being perceived as not credible, and the threat that has been received in LA is being perceived as credible. The specifics of that and the determination or the sort of reasons that go behind determining whether a threat is credible versus not are oftentimes very, very classified, very high-level discussions that are had, and not often sort of shared with the public. And at this point, that is the case. In both situations, the reason that one is credible and the other is not being shared with us at this point. And frankly, it's not necessarily going to make a big difference in terms of what recommendations or what next steps we recommend that anybody takes. That being said, at about 7 o'clock this morning, LAUSD publicized that their schools were going to be closed, and we recommended that all independent, charter, non-public schools, etc., in the city of Los Angeles within the region do go ahead and close for the day. It's important to mention that we had a conversation with LAUSD school police as well as LAPD, and neither of the organizations were able to give a firm mandate that anybody should take action either direction, whether to stay open or to stay closed. And so based on the candid feedback that we got from both LAPD as well as LAUSD school police, we made the recommendation for our clients to go ahead and close school for the day. As the day goes on, we have learned a little bit more information and gotten a copy of the threat, and I'll actually share parts of that with you shortly. As the day continues to go on, we'll more than likely get even more information, and of course we'll turn around and be sure to share that with you. At this point, the threat was received and specifically focused on the LAUSD schools. And so schools that are not LAUSD schools are taking even more of an abundance of caution by closing today, or by securing campus today, or by locking down today, or frankly taking any action that they've chosen to take. LAUSD obviously is also doing the same thing, and as a result of a direct threat. When it comes to the safety of your staff, faculty, and students, there's no way that any of us can predict or attempt to determine the outcomes of a threat like this or understand the magnitude. And so our actions are always, or our recommendations rather, are always to take the highest level of caution possible and to ensure that we've done everything possible to protect students, staff, and faculty and the organization as a whole. That being said, there are sort of two options for how you stand right now, and there are some variations to each, but either the campus is closed or your campus is open. If your campus is closed today, there are a couple of things that are particularly important that you do throughout the day. The first is, and it's a little late for the initial communication, hopefully that's already gone out, but the first is to communicate, to let parents know that you're continuing to monitor the situation, to let parents know that at this point that your school has not received a direct threat, and that's a very important component of this, is to identify that the threat is not associated with your private, charter, or independent school. This threat was received by the LAUSD and targets the LAUSD. So to make sure that you've communicated that to parents in a way that helps them understand that, again, you are not the target of this threat. It's important to remind parents that the decision to close school was out of an abundance of caution, and that we will continue to monitor the situation and provide updates as possible, and that as of now, tomorrow, school will be in session, and that you'll communicate one way or the other to let them know if that changes. If your school is open today, many of you have chosen to secure campus or be in a full lockdown. A full lockdown, if you are not directly next to an LAUSD school, is probably not necessary, although if you've got specific questions about that or your school has some different concerns or thoughts, certainly let us know. We're happy to talk through those with you, and there may be a reason to stay in full lockdown. On the flip side, if you're in a secure campus, and as a reminder, a secure campus means nobody's coming on or off campus, that includes deliveries, that includes parent visitors, that includes staff and faculty that want to leave for lunch or anything else for that matter. truly everybody stays on campus that's on campus now. The power of communication is still incredibly important, and the need for communication is still there. And I would recommend that you communicate before noon to let parents know that you're continuing to monitor the situation, that you've assembled some task force, and incidentally, if you haven't done that yet, then this is the time to do so. Build a small task force even to keep an eye on the news, keep an eye on the information that's coming in, and make sure that you are prepared to pivot and make a different decision if that's necessary. I would recommend that you communicate again towards the end of the school day to let parents know if you've got a normal bus schedule or if the bus schedule will be modified, to let parents know where dismissal will happen. Again, if it's abnormal or normal, communication will be well received. And then I would recommend that tonight, and this is actually true for everyone, whether you're open or closed today, that you have your head of school record a message that goes out to families. And I'll go over specifically what should be in that message in just a moment. But that's going to be a communication that, again, allows the community to move through this incident, come back to school hopefully tomorrow with the understanding that they are safe and that they are not going to continue to be impacted by this threat or by any others, and allow your community to more calmly restore or resume sort of normal operations. The message that your head of school should leave first should be delivered through your emergency notification system. And one of the things that we often talk about with our emergency notification systems is that live emergencies should be managed by text and email. They're written forms of communication, and so they're a lot easier for us to take action on. But follow-up communication and communication that goes out after an event should generally be voice-led. And more often than not, that should be the voice of your head of school. And so this should go out through your emergency notification system. It should specifically reference how quickly your school made the decision to open or close. And that's an important point to make regardless of what the amount of time was. The point is to say we were able to gather our team, we were able to make the decision to either open or close today, and we were able to get that communicated to you. And within a matter of moments, we were able to have that decision in process, and in a matter of minutes or hours, that decision was made and communicated. It's important to remind people or to share with people that you're grateful for their cooperation, whether, again, you're open or closed. Thanking people and bringing them in as part of the response is a great way to help people sit on your team and work with you as opposed to sit on the opposite side of the fence and work against you. And the third and perhaps the most important piece that it should include is the fact that you as a school, and that specifically your head or your administration, if it's not your head that's actually leaving this voicemail, it takes the safety of the students, staff, and faculty on campus incredibly seriously. All three of those points, again, the first one being how quickly you made the decision, how quickly you were aware of it, and then were able to communicate it, how necessary it is to keep everybody on campus safe, and then how grateful you are for everyone's cooperation. Each of these seem to be sort of standard in terms of crisis communication, and they seem to be almost obvious, but it's important to make sure that those are jotted down and that through whatever language you choose, that you're delivering all three of those points. The added piece is, if you've chosen to close today, a note about how you'll communicate if there are any changes. And frankly, this really works on whether you're open or closed. But a quick mention of, we'll communicate to you again tomorrow by text message, phone call, and email if something has changed, or we'll communicate to you just by phone call or email. Whatever it is for your school and your community that makes the most sense, you should be passing on to your parents so that they know how to look for that information, especially if there are last-minute changes that occur tomorrow morning. I would think that by the end of the day today, we should have a good, solid decision about whether we're going to open or close tomorrow. Obviously, we'll be able to share as much information as we have, and we'll give you the best recommendation that we can based on the information that we get from LAPD and from LAUSD School Police. And as other organizations work their way into the fold, the FBI more than likely will be another voice that we'll be able to share with you. That being said, no matter what the decision is today, you should double-check the news, double-check any other resources that you have, and frankly, even contact LAPD or LAUSD School Police directly tomorrow morning to make sure that nothing's changed, and again, that if it has, that you're prepared to communicate that. Throughout the rest of the day, there will be a couple of different updates that will be available. LAUSD will be giving updates every half hour. The next one, it looks like, is scheduled for between 11:30 and noon. Some of those updates, as oftentimes in a real emergency that impacts your own community, you might do, will be strictly, we're still here, we're still working, and we'll give you another update in a half an hour. And so there's nothing wrong with them coming up and saying that, and in fact, it demonstrates their capacity to communicate, and it demonstrates for the community that they are still working on the situation. And so if there's something to learn while all of this is going on and while you're paying attention and participating in the communication, it's structure and how to do so proactively and successfully. And thus far, the LAUSD has done an excellent job at that. In addition to LAUSD's updates every half hour, we have a tentative update scheduled for 4 o'clock. So the plan at this point is if there are any changes, we will conduct another webinar today at 4 o'clock, and of course we'll invite each of you to that. At 4 o'clock, we'll share our best recommendation on tomorrow. And when it comes to tomorrow, it's important to remember that although today's information began and unfolded very, very quickly, and as a result, our recommendation was a blanket, public-private charter, whoever you are, to go ahead and close school. There's a good chance that in the event that LAUSD were to remain closed tomorrow, that it might not be as blanket of an approach. And obviously, we'll share that with you, and that will be based on feedback from LAUSD police, LAPD, and so on. So that will happen at 4 o'clock. This afternoon, we'll also share with you a potential script that your heads of school can use to record that message. One of the things that I like to remind folks is that we'll share with you a script, and it's strictly a starting place, so don't feel like you need to use exactly that. For any points that are particularly important, like the 3 that I mentioned earlier, we'll remind you of those, and we'll let you know why they are, so that if you choose to remove them, that you've done so knowing the reason that we recommended that they were in, at the very least. And it's also important that you customize the scripts to sound like your head of school. A lot of times, or frankly, whoever it is that's going to be recording the message, a lot of times we find that we deliver these scripts and they're delivered verbatim, and that's great from a communications perspective, but doesn't always gather all of the language and style and voice of the school community. So I would challenge each of you to really spend some time modifying those scripts and making them as you as is humanly possible. I want to make sure that I answer a couple of questions, and so I'll do that. But just to confirm, in terms of next steps for each of you, the first and the most important is to get a communication out to let parents know that you're monitoring the situation. Again, whether your school is open or closed today. The second is that later today around dismissal, there should be another communication that goes out that reminds them that you're still monitoring the situation and lets them know any differences in bus schedules, carpool, pickup, things like that. And the next will be this evening, and it should be a message that is recorded and is a voiced message coming from your head of school or somebody from your administration's team. And that person should, in general, remind everybody that they appreciate the support that they received and the cooperation. That message should ensure that you're communicating the importance of the safety of the students, staff, and faculty on campus. And then beyond that, that message should remind people or share with people that you were able to come to a decision quickly and that decision was with the interest of students and staff and faculty safety. There are a couple of questions that came in, and so I'll answer those briefly, and then I'll jump back into just a couple of more points for each of you. The first question is, looks like from David. NYPD is calling the LA scare a hoax. And at this point, that was some information that was seen online. Whether or not it is or was a hoax, the school district, of course, needed to take the steps to ensure that their own staff and faculty and students were safe. Again, they're talking about 750,000 people that they're responsible for. And so their decision to close was a good one from our perspective, based on the information that we know now. And it's unlikely that we would change our opinion of that based on anything that were to come out. Always, you can never go wrong operating with an abundance of caution and safety and staying focused on everybody's safety and protection. The next question that came in, and this is a challenging one, is from Catherine, and The question was, if no bomb or threat is found, does this suggest that we can expect more false threats that effectively create terror without any real danger? And Catherine, absolutely, this is possible. In any type of incident like this, there is a possibility that it's copycatted, it's repeated, and unfortunately, it is something that after a series of false attempts becomes a boy who cried wolf situation. And so I'll challenge each of you to avoid that for your own communities, avoid that for yourselves, and ensure that you look at any threat that's received either to you, by you, or around you as credible until it can be determined that it's not. And if you're struggling with how to analyze whether or not a threat is credible, the first step is to call 911 anytime that a threat is received, whether it's by email, by phone, by any other means. It seems that this year we've had a huge number of email threats that have been received, and unfortunately some of those have been very challenging to identify in terms of who had sent it and how credible they were. But step one is to always call 911. The step that you can take before that is to assemble a threat assessment team. And so for many of our schools that we work with, the threat assessment team consists of a police officer, typically somebody from that region, consists of somebody from the administration, if not the entire senior or leadership team. The threat assessment team generally consists of a safety consultant or somebody who's independently evaluating the school's response. And from our perspective, our focus is normally, all right, well, let's assume this is real now. How do we manage it? And then the threat assessment team should also include a facilities person or whoever it is on campus who's responsible for the preparedness efforts on campus, so that that person is never blindsided with a threat and not able to respond or to help the community respond. So that threat assessment team is something that you certainly can build prior to the event, and we very much recommend that you do that and you take some time to do so. The next question is from Allison, and the question was, how did Joffe communicate their recommendation for private and independent schools to close? And we communicated to all of our client schools as well as those that we have additional relationships with, whether that means we do your CPR and first aid training, or it means you've called us before and said, hey, we need some help, but you're not quite ready to move forward yet. So those calls were made this morning between about 7 and 8:30, depending on the school and the type of interaction and engagement we have. So that was the way that we communicated out. As the rest of the event continues to unfold, we'll communicate primarily by email at this point. It's not quite as urgent of a communication that we're putting out, and so it'll allow us to be a little bit slower in terms of building and disseminating the information. If at any point you're concerned or have questions about how to or what to do, feel free to call our office, and we'll put that phone number in the chat box for you in just a moment, but it's 800-913-6270, and we're happy to help answer questions or sort of walk you through processes. It looks like the next question is from Christina, and the question here is, how does LAPD determine when circumstances are safe? And that's a really good question. Oftentimes at a restricted level, we have to do a very similar thing. We have to figure out on campus, well, when is it safe for us to restore operations? When is it safe for us to come back? And the LAPD has a really incredible algorithm that they use to make a determination about whether or not it's safe. The starting point, though, is identifying where this threat came from and how credible it is. I did just get off the phone with LA School Police as well as LAPD just moments before this webinar, and both confirmed they are still actively searching each of the LAUSD schools to identify if there were indeed any packages or anything else that was suspicious on any campus. If your school is closed today, I would recommend that you have either your security team or LAPD conduct a campus sweep. I have a couple of folks that we can get you set up with. As you probably can understand, LAPD and LAUSD school police are both very, very busy today, and so we have arranged some special arrangements for our charter as well as some of our private schools that need a sweep conducted by them. If either you don't have security or your security is not qualified to conduct a search like that, you can let me know either by way of chatting or asking a question here in this webinar, or you can also call our office and we can get you pointed in the right direction and on the phone with those folks. I can't promise that it will be early in the day, and in fact I can almost promise that it won't be. It more than likely won't be until at least 3:30, 4 o'clock today, if not later into the evening. But if your campus is closed and therefore nobody on campus is sweeping and looking for anything that's odd or out of the ordinary, it would be a good idea to have, again, either security or the police themselves do that sweep or help you with that sweep. It looks like those are the questions that have come in at this point. So I'll just take a moment to remind each of you, and this is probably the most challenging part of this, or part of any incident, any emergency really, that this is not our emergency. This is the LAUSD's emergency. Out of an abundance of caution, we've made the recommendation that all of our schools respond accordingly. But each of you, whether you're open or closed today, is a safe distance away from the emergency itself in as much as you're not an LAUSD school. As more information comes out, we will obviously share that with you. And again, if you've got questions or concerns that are larger and or that are specific to your own community, you're welcome to share those with us. And again, at 4 o'clock today, we will more than likely provide an update via this same webinar. We'll share a link with you at about 3 o'clock so that you can join that if you're interested and or have anything to contribute to it. I can also tell you that at 4 o'clock we'll have a little bit more time to answer some more questions and talk more about tomorrow and next steps. In short, unless your specific community has heard anything otherwise, the assumption at this point is that everybody will return to school tomorrow, and again we'll communicate along with everybody else over the course of the next 4 to 6 hours whether or not that will indeed be the case. So with that, I do want to just take a quick second to say thank you so much to all of you that called in this morning, that have shared information with us, and that have responded. This is a large-scale emergency for the city, and so for each of you to have been as engaged as you were and as quick to respond as you were, and again, as engaged with your own communities as you were, was pretty incredible, and a unique advantage that we had. So thank you very much for your participation in today's webinar, and we'll communicate to you shortly, and of course as anything changes. Thank you.